Hey there, welcome to LSAT Demon Daily. I'm Ben Olson, that's Nathan Fox. We're the founders of LSATdemon.com and our weekly podcast, Thinking LSAT. We have an email here from Sarah. The subject is Developing My Skeptical Voice.
Hey, Ben and Nathan, my previous prep course brought me to scoring mostly in the low 170s, with my range being 167 to 174. I took the August test and I got a 167, and I'm registered to take the September test in a few days. The old prep course put a lot of emphasis on question types and reading the questions first, which I know you guys hate, so I've been working to break that bad habit. However, as I do this, I find that maybe I actually haven't been understanding the arguments as well as I thought. I understand that the process is to decide if the stimulus is an argument or not. Then, if it is, determine if the conclusion is proven by the premises. However, I often find myself thinking, okay, that argument doesn't sound too bad, and running off to the question only to realize it's a flaw question. And I have to go right back. Once that happens, I notice pretty quickly what's wrong with it, but I don't know how to develop that skeptical voice in my head that immediately starts tearing apart the argument. As of late, I get anywhere from -1 to -3 on LR, but those -3s add up, and I just know I can be better. How can I develop that little voice instead of mechanically going down the checklist from my old prep course of listing fallacies and looking for a gap only after getting a hint from the question type? Thanks always, Sarah.
Sarah, you don't need a hint. The vast majority of questions in logical reasoning are arguments, and the vast majority are flawed. It's really rare to come across an argument that is valid and sound. So when it happens, that's where my voice actually clicks in. I say, did I miss something? Because why the fuck does this seem legit? If the conclusion is proven, I am momentarily surprised. Now,
And
sometimes
half the time when that happens, go ahead.
yeah, half the time it turns out to be wrong, right? Because you go into the question.
Well, the other half the time, the question is just a parallel reasoning question.
Parallel reasoning or main point question or reasoning question or something like that. And you say, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm not surprised that the argument wasn't flawed because that's not what they're asking about. But it's still, yeah, that's when I get the double take. When I think, yeah, that conclusion is proven. There's a pause there because I'm like, did I miss something? Because I expect it to be flawed.
No, you should never be thinking the argument doesn't sound too bad, except for in the 10% of arguments, maybe, where
maybe
they
that,
actually present a valid argument. Because if it's a strengthened question or a weakened question or a necessary assumption question or a sufficient assumption question or a flaw question, all those, that means there's something wrong. It's at least incomplete.
Yeah. Which is
On
wrong.
a flaw question,
Yeah.
they have committed something wrong, which, although that, one of the most common flaws is neglects to consider the possibility that, right? Where it's just like, oh, you didn't think of that, did you? But the one overarching flaw is just, hey, your premises don't necessarily prove your conclusion.
Yeah.
And you've got to learn, who is this, Sarah? You got to learn that it's pretty obvious when the conclusion is actually proven by the premises. Because you'll come up with the conclusion before you even read before you even read the conclusion.
Yep.
Right? You'll read a premise and another premise and you'll go, oh, well, based on those two things, you could link those together.
Yep.
And then sure enough, the next sentence will say the link of those two things.
Yeah.
And you'll go, okay, well, now that's a valid argument because I was able to predict the conclusion. But it just happens so infrequently. And I agree. I think Sarah's old prep course is holding her back. She seems to acknowledge that, because she's getting so caught up in question types, thinking that she has to be told there's something wrong with the argument.
That's weird. Your assumption going into every argument is, okay, what the fuck is wrong here?
Yeah.
Yep.
I hope that's helpful, Sarah. I think if you drill for a while longer with just reading the argument first, we don't call it the stimulus, by the way, we just call it the passage. But if you just read the passage first and expect there to be a conclusion and expect that conclusion not to be proven by the premises, you're going to be in great shape, no matter what type of question they ask you to answer. If you notice why it's not a proven argument, you're already 90% of the way to answering whatever question they ask you about that argument. Maybe prediction mode would help here,
Yep.
because in prediction mode, it's a feature of LSAT Demon in the drilling. You can turn on prediction mode and it'll actually hide the question and the answer choices from you. And it'll just give you the stimulus, as you call it, passage, as we call it.
Yeah.
And if you start just doing it in prediction mode and reading those passages, you're going to realize that, like, okay, most of the time there is a conclusion. And when there's a conclusion, almost always that conclusion is not proven by the facts.
Yeah. There's one other thing I want to say here, and that is that Sarah ends by saying listing fallacies and looking for a gap. I'm worried that she has a list of 10
Right.
common flaws in her head and she's
Nope.
trying to fit every
Awful.
argument into one of those flaws. It's so much easier just to look at the conclusion and say, why doesn't this have to be true?
Right.
And that allows you to analyze any argument and
Yeah.
any
There's
flaw.
always a gap. Even on a flawed argument, it's like, well, okay, you cited correlation, you're you're concluding causation. The gap there is
Mm-hmm.
you've cited correlation, but you're concluding causation, and those are two different things. So it's always
There's
just
not enough evidence.
they
Yeah.
have some evidence. That evidence doesn't prove their conclusion. That's always the flaw. All flaws boil
Mm-hmm.
down to they've cited some evidence, and that evidence doesn't prove their conclusion. So you don't have
Mm-hmm.
to wait for a flaw question for that, right? Like, the whole to part flaw or the part to whole flaw, they still boil down
Oh,
to
I can't
they
identify. I
have
can't
some
name this
evidence.
flaw.
It doesn't
Yeah.
matter. They've cited some evidence, and there's a reason why that evidence doesn't prove their conclusion. Just because you have the best team doesn't mean that every player on the team has to be the best.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure, we can call that the whole to part flaw. But the fact that it's the best team is just not enough evidence to prove the conclusion that every player on the team is the best player.
Well, this is why we advocate for trying to take the test with your common sense. You don't need to know the name whole to part flaw or
No.
part to whole flaw. You can just read that and say, we got the best basketball team in the league here. Does that mean that every player on that team needs to be the best player in the
Yeah.
league? No. And I don't know anything about part to whole. So what? You understand why that's not necessarily going to guarantee that each player is the best.
Yeah.
They just work together the best.
Yeah, and you don't need to know the name of confusing sufficient for necessary. You can naturally go, well, wait, okay, Hollywood is in Los Angeles, but that doesn't mean that Los Angeles is Hollywood. That doesn't mean that
Hmm.
everyone in LA is in Hollywood. Yeah, if you're in
Yeah.
Hollywood, you're in LA, but that doesn't mean that if you're in LA, you're in Hollywood. LA is a big
Yeah.
place. Everybody knows that. And
Yeah.
you can respond to it in very common sense terms. You just have to be on the lookout for it.
Yep.
Not on the lookout for that specific flaw, but on the lookout for them to try to lie to you. Like,
Yeah.
the passages are well constructed little tricks. They're
Hmm.
trying to get you to buy this conclusion that's just not justified by the facts. Hope that's helpful, Sarah.
Yeah. Email daily at lsatdemon.com if you'd like to ask us a question or share some LSAT or law school admissions news. Thanks for listening.